For the sake of this video, I want to focus on Rick Joyner's defense of predators. What's up, guys? Welcome to No Culty Vibes. I'm Cassie Marie, and today we're going to be talking about the cult I joined in my early 20s, MorningStar Ministries. I want to really quickly give a trigger warning for this whole video. We are talking about clergy abuse, clergy sexual abuse, child SA, just a lot of really difficult themes of people in power harming those who are under their care, and it's some heavy stuff. So just keep that in mind before you watch this video. So this video is going to be about the cult that I was part of, but it's going to be less about my story and my journey within that cult and more about the cult itself and some of its recent scandals. I want to focus more on the mistreatment and the harm that others have experienced in the cult and less on my own experience. And I just want to give a summary of the person that started it and what's going on there today. But to give you a quick summary of my own experience, I moved to Wilmington, North Carolina with my then boyfriend and now husband when I was, I think, 20 years old. I moved in with my best friend because she was going to UNC Wilmington at the time, and I just wanted to experience life at the beach and just start my life as a new young adult. I was really seeking a lot of life's answers at the time, as many of us do in our late teens and early 20s. And I found myself really in a place where I didn't know exactly what I believed. But my husband's family was a lot more religious than I was growing up. And I really had a lot of questions about God and Christianity and what I wanted that to look like in my life. When we moved, we both really wanted to join a church right away and find a community where we fit in because we didn't know anyone in Wilmington beside my best friend that I was moving in with. Cult experts actually often say that being a seeker and looking for a belief system or guidance in your life is actually like the number one quality or trait in people who end up joining cults. So I fit right into that at the time. Around that same time, my sister-in-law was actually attending YWAM in Hawaii, and she had heard just through the grapevine, I guess, of charismatic Christians about Morningstar Fellowship in Wilmington. She had heard it was a great church and had like a good youth group and highly recommended that we give that a try. We went to one service and I was immediately captivated by their style of worship. As someone who was raised kind of in and out of religion, I was raised kind of Catholic. My mom's side of the family was Catholic. My dad's side of the family was Methodist. And I had experienced Catholic church and Methodist church. And those are more like rigid and structured, I guess, styles of religion. So stepping into a charismatic evangelical space when I had no idea what that was at the time felt like really expressive and freeing. And I was immediately sold, as weird as that might sound. As I continue to share about this organization through this video, you might think that I'm completely crazy for like enjoying this environment and joining this cult. But through my 20-year-old seeking eyes, it was like exactly what I was looking for. They were just restarting their young adult group at the time, so my husband and I were really excited and just jumped in feet first. We really clicked with that group of young adults. We're friends with many, if not all of them, to this day. And we immediately joined their prophetic ministry internship, which I had no idea what that was whatsoever before I set foot in this church. And we were so involved in the church and found a good community and eventually became young adult leaders ourselves. Because we were at Morningstar Fellowship in Wilmington, our experiences were very different from some of the things that I'm going to share with you in this video. We're going to mostly be talking about the founder of Morningstar, Rick Joyner, and the main church in Fort Mill, South Carolina, which is in the Charlotte, North Carolina area. We actually used to refer to Morningstar in Charlotte, Fort Mill area as the mothership, which is another one of those like red flags where looking back on it now, clearly it's like maybe if your organization has a mothership that they refer to, you might be joining a cult. I did witness my own fair share of issues and harms and just things that I felt were not helpful to myself and to other people at the time just because of prophetic ministry, which I'll explain to you in a second. But again, our experiences were just very different from what I'm going to be talking about. I may or may not make a video about those at a different time. I'm going to explain what prophetic ministry is to you really quick, and then we are going to dive into the founding of MorningStar Ministries and some of the harms and scandals happening right now. So, the best way that I can explain prophetic ministry is that it's basically like being a Christian psychic. I'm not even kidding you. I went through a whole internship that taught me how to hear from the Lord for other people, for their edification, encouragement, and comfort. I think was like the literal lines that we were taught to share with other people. And we basically would just ask God to give us a word, is what it was called, for whoever was standing right in front of us asking for ministry at the time. And some people would close their eyes, others wouldn't. And just kind of whatever came to mind, you would tell that person, God is saying this, this, and this to you. There are different levels of prophetic ministry or the belief in the prophetic within these movements that I'm going to talk about later on in the video. Not all of these movements believes that anyone can be prophetic or should be prophetic. Some of these movements believe that these men in charge, these leaders in power, are more prophetic than other people, which I'm sure you could understand how that becomes harmful. And they also believe there are kind of different levels of prophetic words. Usually, these men in leadership will get like what they will call like for sure certain words from God. And they'll say, like, this is definitely God or definitely the Lord saying this to you. And others will like say this is more through my interpretation of what I think God is saying and shouldn't be taken as seriously as others. It's very complicated and very nuanced. If you have any questions about it, feel free to leave them in the comments below, and maybe I'll be able to respond to those and answer some of the questions more in depth. But for the purposes of this video, I think you'll kind of understand where we're going with this. Hey friends, I'm working really, really hard on growing this channel this year. I have some big goals for the work that I do as a content creator, exposing cults, doing deep dives on cults and celebrity cult members. And if you enjoy this content or appreciate the work that I do, there are a couple of different ways that you can support this work. The first thing you can do is totally free and doesn't take much of your time at all. If you could just like this video and subscribe if you haven't already. If you want to go the extra mile, you can comment or share this with a friend or even share it on social media. Second, consider becoming a channel member. It's only $4.99 a month, and that gives you access to a members only episode every week. I switch off between a cult deep dive and a celebrity cult member deep dive for those. You also get all the fun perks of becoming a YouTube member. There's members only emojis, you get priority comment replies, and I also do a live Q&A for members only once a month. And then third and most fun in my opinion, did you know that I'm actually an artist? I have an online art shop where I sell stickers and prints and bookmarks and other fun stuff, a lot of which is cult and pop culture themed, and also just some designs that I love painting and creating, and I think you would love it as well. Click the link in the description box to check it out and shop to your heart's desire. Honestly, you just watching this video means the world to me, and I am so, so grateful for your support. Hey, Binky Bones. So, MorningStar Ministries is a nonprofit organization that was founded by Rick Joyner and his wife, Julie Joyner, in 1985. Side note, a lot of these charismatic evangelical ministries list the husband and wife as the founders or leaders of the ministry, like Rick and Julie Joyner or Mike and Diane Bickle, I believe, founded IHOP KC. I have several videos about that on my channel as well if you want to go search and look through those. But from what I can tell, the wives never have any like real leadership position within the ministry. Sometimes they'll lead women's ministries, but they never have like real positions on the board, or obviously they don't pastor the church. They don't really do much except for act as the pretty face and stay home and raise their children. So I always find it interesting that the husband and wife are listed as like the founders and leaders of the ministry. Now, finding information on Rick Joyner before or in the early days of MorningStar Ministries has been a challenge. There's almost nothing about him on the internet, and I really had to do some digging to find any of this information. From what I can tell, Rick Joyner appears to have no training from any Bible colleges, and he's never been to a theological seminary. I don't even know what religion he was or what churches he went to before he started MorningStar Ministries. I do know that he was in the Navy and was a commercial pilot for a time. According to one website I found, Rick claims that he was asked to be a pastor of a small church that he attended until 1980 and was quoted saying he left because he was one of the worst pastors he had ever met. Don't know how that equates to starting your own ministry, but that's exactly what he did. I did finally locate a website from the Wayback Machine Internet Archives that was written a long time ago that said Rick Joyner converted to Christianity in 1971 and realized that he had, quote, an ability to foresee certain future events accurately and occasionally look at people and know details about them, such as problems they were having or spiritual callings on their life, which is kind of the basis for the beliefs in the prophetic and prophetic ministry. As far as like the roots of his belief system or the MorningStar Ministries belief system in general, when I attended MorningStar Fellowship in Wilmington, I was only told that we fell into the non-denominational category, and it was never really elaborated on, and I was never given any information beyond that, even when I would pry and say, okay, but like what denominate, like what is this like founded in, like what is it based in? Since Rick Joyner has no formal training and we know absolutely nothing about the church he was asked to pastor for a time, I suppose non-denominational is appropriate and that would be true, but the belief system that MorningStar holds is not unique to MorningStar, and this would fall in the apostolic prophetic movement of Protestant Christianity, or charismatic evangelical would also be one way to describe this belief system. Rick Joyner is an advocate for the fivefold ministry and the seven mountain mandate. If you are new to me, those words might be new to you, but if you have seen any of my previous content on the TikTok dance cult, 7M Films, and Shekinah Church, or if you've seen my stuff on YWAM or IHOP KC, you will have heard these words before. These movements are similar to or adjacent to, and like sometimes intertwine with, the New Apostolic Reformation, or NAR, which is in the news a lot lately because it is one of the main movements behind the growing sentiments of Christian nationalism. And many leaders of these movements, including Rick Joyner, publicly supported Donald Trump through both of his campaigns and were often seen praying for him or praying with him. Many of the leaders of this movement are Donald Trump's, not many, a couple of the people in this movement have even been Donald Trump's personal advisors, like Cindy Jacobs. Based on my research in previous videos, these movements are rooted in the Pentecostal traditions and belief systems and often tie back to the Assemblies of God and Pentecostal revivals like the Toronto Blessings. I can't find literally a single thing on the internet on what happened between when Rick Joyner stopped being a pastor in 1980 and when he started MorningStar Ministries in 1985. But from what I could tell, he started the ministry and focused on MorningStar Publications, which is the company that he used to publish many of his books. So he literally was just a guy in the Navy that became a commercial pilot that then decided to start a ministry and publish books about God and his beliefs in the prophetic. Rick Joyner's first book, There Were Two Trees in the Garden, was published in 1986, and it's a book about the tree of knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life. Many of these books are required reading for students of MorningStar University, which is a part of MorningStar that develops later on. And all of the books are highly recommended reading to everyone who attends MorningStar. My husband and I, when we were researching this and talking about it, actually we're mentioning how that should have been another red flag, that we were required to read the leaders' books as part of our internship. And even when you're not required to read it, it's still highly recommended. And they are viewed as like very spiritual books that will help you in your spiritual journey and your growth with God. This also reminds me a little bit of one of our favorite, or I guess you could call him our least favorite cult leader around here, L. Ron Hubbard, who is the founder of Scientology. L. Ron Hubbard wrote and published way more books than Rick Joyner, though. He actually holds the Guinness World Record for the number of books written, And he was a science fiction writer before he wrote any of the books that have to do with Scientology. But once he wrote Dianetics, he like exclusively wrote books about his religion, and it's still required reading for Scientologists to this day. If you would think that checking MorningStar Ministries' own website might give us more insight to how MorningStar was founded and like when it was created, what it was created for, you would be wrong. It is very vague and there's very minimal information. What it does say is that Morningstar began with the biblical mandate of Matthew 24:45 through 46. Now, if you're like me and don't know what that is, don't worry. They've got you covered. They have the Bible verse quoted and their commentary on like what that means to them. So the Bible verse is, "Who then is the faithful and sensible slave whom his master put in charge of his household to give them their food at the proper time? Blessed is that slave whom his master finds so doing when he comes home." And then Morningstar goes on to say, "To comply with this mandate, we seek to always serve the master's household, not be served by it. Our ministry motto is, we will not use people to build our ministry, but we will use our ministry to build people." That sounds like a lot of fluffy, like loaded language to me. And because I've been out of it for so long and I didn't know any of this when I was in, I don't exactly know what that means. And that is literally it when it comes to Morningstar's founding. Any other information may possibly be included in an audio teaching that's available on their website for $15. That's literally titled The History of Morningstar. I personally have already given too much of my money to this organization, so I didn't want to give them another $15 to hear about their founding from their point of view. So we're just going to go through a quick timeline from the point of view of the rest of us and what I could find in news publications on the internet. So when MorningStar Ministries was founded in 1985, it was founded in Jackson, Mississippi. And at some point in the mid 1990s, Rick Joyner moved it to Charlotte, North Carolina. And Morningstar Publications was listed, had an address listed for Charlotte, North Carolina, and Rick Joyner was listed as the president. Rick Joyner did have ties to North Carolina because he was born in Raleigh, North Carolina, but I think he lived in Richmond, Virginia for a time, and then obviously somehow ended up in Jackson, Mississippi. So I'm not really sure what brought him back to North Carolina, but he did decide to make Morningstar headquarters in Charlotte. In 1995, Morningstar Fellowship Church in Fort Mill was established, and this is the first mention I can find of a place of worship for Morningstar Ministries. Before this, like I said, it was listed. There were a couple of different organizations listed under Morningstar Ministries, but it looks like Rick Joyner only did anything with Morningstar Publications and was just writing books at the time. But by 1995, he did have Morningstar Fellowship in Fort Mill. In 1997, Joyner purchased 320 acres of land in Wilkes County, North Carolina, near Moravian Falls. And at that time, he moved the headquarters for Morningstar Ministries from Charlotte, North Carolina to Wilkes County, North Carolina to this 320 acres of land. There is a lot of Morningstar lore behind this land. Like I said, I don't really remember how they framed the founding of it, but it was kind of like a word of knowledge from God, or it was through like a vision or a prayer that Rick Joyner felt that he was supposed to buy this land. It is definitely considered sacred. And I think even still to this day, a lot of people go there to the different like structures and things that Morningstar has built in Wilkes County near Moravian Falls, not really as like a pilgrimage, but definitely like as a spiritual place, more spiritual than like other locations, to connect with God or the Holy Spirit or grow in your faith. Now, the next thing I'm going to say to you is complete rumor. I did not get a chance to verify this, but I just wanted to include it because it does remind me of other cults that I've studied and researched. But I did have a couple reach out to me on Facebook a couple of years ago saying that they lived near the Morningstar land in Wilkes County near Moravian Falls. And they had mentioned that it was purchased in a weird way and that Morningstar has kind of been a menace to the residents of Moravian Falls since they've been there. It reminded me of how the residents of Redding, California feel about Bethel Church, which was a similar charismatic church started by Bill Johnson after the Toronto Blessings. And they have a ministry school called Bethel School of Supernatural Ministry. And apparently, the students are menaces around the city to residents of Reading. So it just like hit on my radar and reminded me of that. If you are the couple that reached out to me, or if you live in Wilkes County or near Moravian Falls and you know anything about this and want to tell me more, please reach out. My email is in the description box and on all my socials, and you can DM me on Instagram as well. So, the next part of Morningstar's development is going to sound kind of crazy. I'm going to jump back just a couple years from 1997 to 1994. Rick Joyner did appear in a couple news publications because he was named as someone who was talking about building a biblical theme park with NFL star Reggie White, who was trying at the time and apparently failing to purchase Heritage USA theme park in Fort Mill, South Carolina. That name may ring a bell for some of you. Heritage USA theme park was founded by Jim and Tammy Faye Bakker, who were famous televangelists. It was often referred to as the Disneyland for Christians, and it was like huge and fully equipped with all kinds of things like a water park and a railroad and a hotel and an indoor shopping village and costumed characters and just all kinds of fun things you would want to find at a theme park, but all with a Christian spin. Heritage USA also had these two like huge towers that were, the bones of them were built and they were set to become kind of timeshare suites for people who wanted to buy lifetime access to be able to go to the theme park. Jim Bakker started selling lifetime access to people for just $1,000. And for that $1,000, you could set up a 3-night stay at the hotel basically at any time for the rest of your life. And because they were famous televangelists and there was actually really high attendance for this theme park, Jim and Tammy Faye sold tens of thousands of these $1,000 lifetime memberships before construction on the towers was even close to being completed. The next part of this is dark, so trigger warning before you move forward to the next part of this story. People started to wonder where all this money was going because construction on the towers was not being completed. And it turned out that Jim Bakker was using a huge chunk of this money to pay off his church secretary because she had accused him of raping her at the time. Jim Bakker also paid himself more than $3 million in bonuses the year that they sold all of those memberships. And after the Charlotte Observer exposed some of these inconsistencies with the money coming in and what was happening to the tower, the news media at large got a hold of it and Jim Bakker was completely exposed. Attendance at Heritage USA theme park dropped dramatically and Jim Bakker went to jail for fraud. And then Heritage USA theme park had to file for bankruptcy. This all happened in 1987. So before Rick Joyner came to Charlotte, North Carolina and started really building up MorningStar Ministries in North Carolina. But by 2004, Rick Joyner did end up buying a chunk of Heritage USA. He bought about 52 acres for $1.6 million. And then later, I think he purchased a couple more acres. And what he purchased included the original hotel that had been finished, the indoor shopping village, and it did include the big towers that was supposed to hold all these timeshare suites that was unfinished. Rick Joyner was quoted at the time saying, Jim Bakker, when he got out of prison, he told me he thought we were supposed to have that property. We would get it and restore it. I don't know how Rick Joyner knew famous televangelist Jim Bakker. I don't know how Rick Joyner knew famous NFL star Reggie White, because from what I can tell, he wasn't like deeply embedded into these like Christian circles. He was just a guy that started writing books. But from what I could tell by like the mid 1990s, MorningStar Ministries was making a lot of money. I don't know if it's because the books were self-published. Like, I don't know how he actually started gaining traction and started becoming somewhat famous in evangelical circles, but he did. And he got in with Jim Bakker and bought the property. MorningStar Fellowship Church in Fort Mill was then moved to the Heritage USA property and was held in that like hotel space and indoor shopping village and is still held there today. I also couldn't find any details of when this was established online, but at some point, MorningStar also did develop its own ministry school that they referred to as MorningStar University. It's similar to Bethel School of Supernatural Ministry. A lot of people know Bethel more because their songs ended up being more famous than Morningstar's, but Morningstar is almost like a copy paste situation of Bethel. So it has the ministry school, it has its own production company, and it did make its own songs and had more so, I think, in the 90s, early 2000s, had some like famous recording, not super famous, but famous in like worship music circles, recording artists. And today, according to their website, Morningstar Ministries as a whole includes Morningstar Publications, Morningstar Conferences, the Morningstar Fellowship of Ministries, the Morningstar Fellowship of Churches. This is what my church would have been, I think, like housed under Morningstar Fellowship Church in Wilmington. They also have Cornelius School for Creative Leadership, Eagle Star Productions, which I believe was their music like production company, Heritage International Ministries, Apostolic and Prophetic Councils, and Rick Joyner is also a member of the Knights of Malta, which is a Catholic religious order. I genuinely am so confused by this man. I don't know who he thinks he is, but it's listed on the website that Morningstar Ministries also includes Knights of Malta. Morningstar really expanded from there with all of these different entities under Morningstar Ministries. There are more like ministries and churches, mostly only located though in North Carolina and some in New Jersey for some reason. But this is the basic structure of what Morningstar entails and our stories of some of the harmful behavior that we're going to talk about today really consists of Morningstar Fellowship Church in Fort Mill. One last thing I feel like is fairly important to know about Rick Joyner is that he is a far right conservative Christian nationalist politically, and he has perpetuated harmful Christian nationalist rhetoric for many, many years. In 2021, Rick Joyner was in the news for literally begging, quote, true disciples of Christ in America to rise up and prepare for a civil war against forces of evil that stole the election away from Donald Trump. I actually found footage of Rick Joyner claiming stolen elections well before Donald Trump, but he has also mentioned a few times throughout the years that Christians should be preparing for a civil war. So with that information in our back pocket, let's move on to some of the controversies surrounding MorningStar Ministries and Rick Joyner. Since I am talking about this on my channel as a cult or a cult-like church, I'm sure you can imagine MorningStar has been plagued with controversy or scandal pretty much since it started. There have been smaller issues like people really having a problem with the fact that Rick Joyner never went to Bible college or any kind of theological seminary, and people don't know what his beliefs are based on, to Morningstar Ministries being denied tax exempt status by the North Carolina Department of Revenue for making money and using property for things that were not related to worship. There's a whole thing around the giant scam towers, timeshare thingies that Jim Bakker built, where Rick Joyner essentially tried to do the same thing and sell $1,000 like memberships to have a suite in these towers. I might make another video about that at some point because I literally can't believe he did the same thing for the same amount of money. But for the sake of this video, I want to focus on Rick Joyner's defense of predators and how he repeatedly puts his congregation and people who follow him in danger by platforming and putting dangerous men into positions of leadership, oftentimes even after they've admitted to wrongdoing. This is something that has been present in Rick Joyner since the founding of MorningStar Ministries and starting with his connections to Jim Bakker. After Jim Bakker's fall from grace, where he paid off a woman who was accusing him of sexual assault and rape, and he went to jail for fraud, Rick Joyner had a huge hand in relaunching Jim Bakker's career. Charisma magazine reported, Jim Bakker, who says he's nearly 100% healed from the PTL downfall and his subsequent prison term, now wants to help restore other ministers who have fallen or who suffered from stress or burnout. That is not what happened to Jim Bakker, but okay. Thanks to a donation of property by Rick Joyner's MorningStar Ministries, Bakker and his wife Lori Beth will get that chance. Joyner's ministry donated a 17,000 square foot log lodge in Charlotte, North Carolina, to the Bakkers' New Covenant Fellowship Ministry in May. Rick Joyner has also consistently appeared on the Jim Bakker Show throughout the years, which was the new show that Jim Bakker started after his prison term and after he remarried. And Rick Joyner speaks very highly of Jim Bakker despite the divorce, the fraud, the allegations of rape, etc. And in a publication Rick Joyner made, his prophetic bulletin number 73, which from the best I could tell was published either in 2012 or 2011, he talks about why he felt like he should have a hand in restoring Jim Bakker to ministry. I'm going to read kind of a long passage from this bulletin and try to put it up on the screen for you to follow along. But he starts by talking about a dream that he feels like God gave him in 1989, where God asked him to help his child, Jim Bakker. Rick Joyner then goes on to say, at that time, Jim Bakker was possibly the most scorned and ridiculed person on the planet. I knew the father felt just like I did watching my child struggle while people scorned and ridiculed him. Even though I was dreaming, I think this was the worst feeling I've ever had. When I woke up, I knew that to relieve the father of what he was feeling for Jim Bakker was worth any price I had to pay. I also had it implanted in my spirit that there is no greater way to gain the favor of God than to help his children who no one else wants to help. Since then, I have considered it a mandate to help Jim in any way that I can. I also think it is one of the great opportunities to help any of his children that I can who have fallen. Still, I can't help them all, but only the ones he shows me. I count this as one of the most important things that I can do. I do not mean to imply that this is something I'm very good at. I often think I may be the worst one at this, which, side note, sounds like what he said about being a pastor. He was one of the worst people he knew at being a pastor. I may be the worst one at this, and that the Lord's people deserve someone who can do it much better. But I do think it is the greatest honor I can have, and I do try my best. If I was to leave this life today, I would consider that I have already been rewarded many times over what I deserved for the little I did give. I am sharing this now for your sake. If you want to gain the Father's favor, help his people. If you want to receive the greatest favor, help those no one else is willing to help. The more unpopular it is to help them, the harder it is. The more of his favor you will receive. As Tommy Tenney once said to us, one moment of favor with God is worth a lifetime of effort. This is true. It may be the greatest wisdom to help God's people who are struggling, but even if we were to receive nothing, the Father deserves this. When the world rebelled against him, he did not condemn us, but he sent his own son to redeem and restore us, even when we were still in our sin. Those who have his heart, who are truly spiritual, are like him, always looking to restore. See Galatians 6:1, not condemn. When he walked the earth, consider how much patience he had with sinners and how little patience he had with the self-righteous. Restoring was the main labor I was called to do to receive the sons of Issachar anointing. I am sure others have been called to pursue this too, because there will be a great company with this gift in coming times. Their call to hard labor may have been different than mine, but I do know that most had to bear great hardship and reproach, going through a long period of being humbled and made of no reputation. That will be a hallmark of the true leaders who are to come. As the Apostle Paul spoke of how the apostles were considered to be the dregs of the earth, this is a hallmark for the true apostolic ministry God is about to release. They may not be very well known on earth, but they will be very well known in heaven. Many who are considered the dregs of earth are kings and princes in heaven. When the kingdom comes, those who have been lifted up here will be humbled, and those who have embraced humility here will be lifted up. Many people write to me to tell me how sorry they are for all the attacks that I receive. I appreciate their concern, but this is actually a part of my reward. We get more martyr points when we receive reproach for doing the will of God. After the apostles had been beaten and threatened for doing what they were called to do, they went out rejoicing that they had been considered worthy to suffer shame for the sake of the Lord. They understood the true riches of the kingdom. And then he goes on and on about how righteous it is to be considered bad or unpopular. Now, I want us to sit with these words by Rick Joyner for a second and think about them from a perspective of possible manipulation and coercive control. He starts out by saying he had a dream from God. So, a divine inspiration, a divine word from an otherworldly, all knowing, omnipotent being to help restore men who have fallen, who are unpopular, back into ministry. Now, he's not talking about men that are unpopular because of their political beliefs or because people just don't like them or just don't like the way they preach. He's talking about Jim Bakker, who committed fraud and went to jail for it, paid himself money that he took from innocent people that wanted to go to a Christian water park and paid money for something that, for lifetime access to something that they thought would be built and finished and never was. And he was accused of raping a woman and paid her off to stay quiet so he could continue grifting people. These aren't like mild accusations or mildly unpopular things. He's talking about a predator, a literal predator that went to jail. But Rick Joyner calls this a mandate. He says he has an anointing and a divine authority and has been asked by God to do this not only for Jim Bakker, but many other men like him. So he thinks God wants him to restore predators into leadership over and over again for the rest of his life. He also says he's not good at it. He doesn't think he's good at it, but he's been asked to by God. And just to give you a little insight, if you're not from this world or familiar with this world, a lot of times people will say things like that, like, I'm not good at it, but God told me to do it, so I'm going to do it. And they believe that God will make them good at it. And if God asks them to do something, it's because they're supposed to do it and they're supposed to do it their way. And God will work out everything else, whether you're good at it or not. I actually heard like similar sentiments and belief systems in like woo woo new agey spaces that like if you find yourself somewhere doing something, you're meant to do it. And whether you're good at it or not, you'll figure it out and like everything will work out. But in this case, Rick Joyner says this all the time and gives himself an out. So if he restores a predator to ministry, therefore putting them in front of more people they can prey on, and they do it again, he now has an out. Well, I was just obeying God. I've said over and over again that I'm no good at this. So if they reoffend, that's not my fault. I didn't do anything wrong. And let me tell you, reoffend they do. Let's get into some of the other men that Rick Joyner has restored to ministry. In 2019, news broke of sexually inappropriate behavior and allegations of sexual assault committed by a pastor named Todd Bentley, who was a pastor of Fresh Fire USA Ministries. And this came out because a former protege of Todd Bentley made a very long Facebook post accusing him of a number of different things. In this post, this protege said, quote, Todd Bentley has an appetite for a variety of sexual sins, including both homosexual and heterosexual activity. This protege also accused Todd Bentley's wife, Jessa Bentley, and other Christian leaders like Rick Joyner for covering up Todd Bentley's behavior and enabling the continued pattern of his activities. Now, I had to dig a little bit and look into the allegations because sometimes Christian language around sexual misconduct can be very misleading. One huge characteristic of cults is using loaded language. Loaded language is words that have different meaning to people inside the cult than they have to people outside of the cult. It's one way to develop like an us versus them mentality and determine who's like in the in crowd versus the out crowd. And it allows for manipulation because words don't always mean the same thing and intuitively mean what you think they would mean inside the cult as they do outside of it. Loaded language also can be used to stop critical thinking and reduce something with complex meaning into like cliched simplicities. So, in cases like these, terms like sexual sin or immoral and ungodly sexual behavior literally could mean anything from someone simply being gay or a member of the LGBTQ plus community, which obviously to those outside the belief system isn't a problem. It is not a sin. It does not make someone a predator. That's like a very different thing. It is literally just a sexual preference. Or like sexual sin or ungodly behavior could mean having an affair, cheating on your wife, sexting an intern, It could literally mean anything all the way up to sexual assault or even rape. Another example would be sexual addiction. This could be anything from someone stumbling across bikini photos on Instagram repeatedly to a full blown porn addiction, or even someone who just has sex before they're married to different people, or what would be considered too many different people. Or it could be like a legitimate sexual addiction that someone needs to go to rehab for. It could mean anything along that spectrum. So in Todd Bentley's case, his former protege said, quote, "Down through the years, Todd Bentley has made sexual advances toward, and in some cases engaged in sexual sin with, a number of different men and women outside his marriage, many of them interns and or students under his leadership care in the church." This would be considered clergy sexual abuse. These allegations included testimony from a male intern who claimed in 2013 that Todd Bentley offered him $1,000 to perform oral sex on him. So, how does Rick Joyner play into all of this? Rick Joyner helped Todd Bentley be restored to ministry and create Fresh Fire USA in 2009 after he separated from his ex-wife, Shauna, because he had an emotional affair and an emotional relationship with a staff member. So Rick Joyner says God has given him a mandate to restore unpopular men to ministry. He did so, restored Todd Bentley. And when Todd Bentley was behaving in a very dangerous manner, this protege went to Rick Joyner and asked him, hey, please do something about this. You restored him, but not only is he not restored, he's escalated and he's hurting people. This former protege's name is Stephen Powell, and he asked Rick Joyner to stage an intervention or do something after witnessing this pattern of continued disturbing behavior from Todd Bentley. And do you know what Rick Joyner said? He currently has no authority over Todd Bentley, but he also acknowledged being aware of the accusations that Todd Bentley had preyed on interns. He also acknowledged that Stephen Powell had come to him and tried to pressure him into swift action against Todd Bentley, which Rick Joyner said was a spirit of witchcraft, especially because Stephen Powell decided to go public with this knowledge after Rick Joyner refused to do a single thing. Rick Joyner was quoted saying, "When people come to me with pressuring, manipulating, especially threatening if I don't do something their way or in their time, I know that's the devil." That's in scripture. Counterfeit spiritual authority, which is called witchcraft. That is not the Holy Spirit. We've got to start recognizing what is from the Holy Spirit and what is not. Mind you, he is referring to someone coming to him who has restored a man to ministry after an emotional affair, begging him for help immediately before someone else gets hurt, and saying, if you don't help him ASAP, I'm going public with this information to prevent anyone else from getting hurt. That's a spirit of witchcraft, and Rick Joyner doesn't want to act on anything that he's told to do. Sounds a whole lot like a cult leader to me. We see more of that loaded language in Rick Joyner's response by saying that this protege is under a spirit of witchcraft. He is not only using a term that will really mean something and be actually very terrifying to people within the cult, within this belief system, but he's also labeling this person and othering them and putting them on the other side of us versus them. That person is now a them and an outcast and shouldn't be listened to or trusted, which again is extremely dangerous considering this is the whistleblower trying to help save people from harm. In reference to Todd Bentley, Rick Joyner said something very similar to what he said for Jim Bakker's restoration. He said, quote, "I do not have authority over Todd Bentley. Those of you who know the story had the issues that manifested in 2008. I was asked by Peter Wagner as a representative of the Revival Alliance to oversee Todd's restoration. I was given very few guidelines, not anything. Just, here, you take this, we think you're supposed to do it. I thought I was the worst one in the world to do it," he said. "I'm not good at that. That's not my type of calling." Uh, Literally, you posted in a bulletin on your own website just a few years ago that God gave you a dream. This was a divine anointing, and you had authority to restore people over and over again, and you considered it your greatest honor. You did say that you weren't good at it back then as well. And clearly you're not good at it now because this is not only like failing to restore someone to a leadership position, this is someone becoming worse after you have your hands on them. If you don't know what you're doing, you shouldn't be doing it. You're putting people in danger. So, of course, at the time, Todd Bentley denied any wrongdoing. Over the next several months, many more allegations came to light on top of what Stephen Powell, the protege, had posted in his long Facebook post, including allegations that Todd Bentley sexually assaulted 3 girls in Pakistan on a missions trip. Finally, in 2020, a panel of 6 charismatic Christian leaders determined that Todd Bentley was disqualified from ministry and should not be a leader, which it seems to me Rick Joyner should have done well before that. It seems like we knew this was probably the case the second he had an affair against his ex-wife and got divorced, but what do I know about any of this, right? So the panel determined after several firsthand accounts of allegations dating all the way back to 2004. So well before Rick Joyner restored him. You would think that like if God wanted to restore somebody, they would pull out all of the wrong things they had done even before the one thing that they were found guilty of. Like you would think if someone was being repentant and had the ability to completely change from being a literal predator, they would confess all of the wrong things they did. It appears that's not the case, shockingly, to the rest of the world. There were also tons of second and third hand allegations that were verified and confirmed by an independent investigator. All of this combined obviously confirmed that Todd Bentley was not fit for ministry, which the other thing about this evangelical charismatic world that drives me crazy is like, not fit for ministry is like the least of the problems. Yes, the man should not be in a leadership position so that he can like literally commit clergy abuse and clergy sexual abuse against many unknowing people. He also should be in jail. Like these should be reported to law enforcement, and sometimes they are, but oftentimes they're not. Also, sometimes these things are reported to the public and to congregations at large, and oftentimes they're not. They will just quietly let these pastors disappear if the media doesn't get hold of what was going on. Now, luckily at the time, this whole Todd Bentley situation, the media definitely got hold of because of the whistleblower making public accusations, which is why I personally think public accusations are not only the right thing to do, they are extremely necessary and important in these evangelical Christian settings. This panel also released a statement where they said, quote, "Sadly, we see no signs of true lasting repentance. Instead, we see a steady pattern of compromised behavior, including credible accusations of adultery, sexting, including the exchanging of nude pictures or video, vulgar language, and substance abuse." I don't know why they stopped there, because obviously there were a lot more allegations of a lot worse things. The panel said it could foresee Bentley doing public ministry again. Let me stop you right there, panel. Why? Why? I really would like to know the thought process behind why they think these men, why they think after going through this process and then escalating their terrible behavior, why would you think that they're capable of being reformed, restored, whatever, to do it again? Why do you think that? There's no evidence to suggest it's a cult. That's why. Cults, coercion, manipulation, undue influence, and a lack of critical thinking due to many tactics of coercive control is why they think this is possible. So the panel said it could foresee Bentley doing public ministry again, but stressed at no point should he lead his own ministry, at minimum. The panel also outlined what it saw was necessary steps to Bentley's restoration. This would include breaking sinful habits, public acknowledgement without equivocation of his wrongdoing, asking forgiveness for those he has sinned against, and submission to local leadership, apparently none of which he was willing to do. I would add being reported to law enforcement and possible jail time. Now, when I tell you talking about Rick Joyner gets me so elevated, it really does. I'm trying to rein it in for you guys here. This man makes me crazy. His pattern of thinking is absolutely insane. Rick Joyner claimed he thought Todd Bentley should go through another restoration process. Why? So he could escalate his behavior once more, since the first restoration process went so well. Don't know, but he claimed that was what he thought should happen. He should go through another restoration process. And I'm not kidding you when I tell you in 2024 the year of our Lord 2024. This year happened just a couple months ago, just a month ago, amidst another scandal at MorningStar Ministries. The president and CEO of Ministries at the time last year, Chris Reed, had claimed that Rick Joyner had planned on putting Todd Bentley on a stage again, and that Rick was looking to bring Todd Bentley back into the ministry, which is going to make you a little cuckoo crazy like me when you hear about who Chris Reed is and what the current scandals are that are happening at MorningStar. And guess what? Chris Reed's claims happen to be true. Rick Joyner did exactly that and brought Todd Bentley up on stage at a conference that ran from December 29th to December 31st, 2024. Literally a couple weeks ago. Hi, I'm editing this video and I wanted to add something into this part of the video specifically because today I was sent a Facebook post made on January 7th of this year, so just last week, from somebody who was repeatedly essayed while they worked for Todd Bentley's ministry. They went on to share a story of a time where they may have also been roofied. I cannot read the part of the story to you where they were assaulted because I think this video genuinely would get demonetized by YouTube, but I want to read you some parts of this post because it speaks to the cult-like nature of not only Rick Joyner, MorningStar Ministries, but also Todd Bentley. And I also think that sometimes hearing firsthand stories and accounts of a situation is more powerful and impactful than hearing kind of secondhand accounts or just brief overviews like I'm doing in this video. I'm going to link the Facebook post in the description and in the show notes because I think that if you are able, if you feel like you're in a place where you could take in this information, I think that you should read it in its entirety. But the parts that I wanted to point out are when this woman said that she was so disturbed by the incident that occurred, she ended up leaving Fresh Fire Church and moved to another church in Charlotte, North Carolina. She didn't tell her new church what happened, and she carried a lot of shame and feeling like it was her fault, which is extremely common, not only in cases of assault and abuse, but also with church abuse and in cases of like surviving cults. But I'm going to read this part. Jessa Bentley was upset that I moved on and said that she wanted to offer me a position as a women and children's pastor, something many know I've wanted to do for a long time. Wanted to do was to be a pastor, but I absolutely could not trust them the same anymore, so I politely declined over and over. This is something Todd and Jessa do when they mistreat you or someone on their team who they exploit others with is found out. They offer you things. She was adamant about me accepting this position with them, but I fought to be kind to them and not accept. I also continued to try to serve them in ways I could without getting too close. I was very confused after all of this because Jessa was someone I considered one of my best friends. I didn't know their involvement until way after this night, a few years later, when I would see the proof of how they exploited me and abused others. So this is something extremely common with cults. A lot of times they will, after they harm someone or hurt them over and over, they will then shower them with gifts or promote them to new positions within the cult. This happened in the story of 7M Films, Shekinah Church, the TikTok dance cult. The main girl that the Netflix documentary was made on, Miranda Derrick, was often given gifts like designer purses and designer clothes that allegedly were taken from other members of the church and given to her whenever she did something right, or I assume also whenever she did something wrong or was harmed by someone else, they would then shower her with these gifts, and this was talked about in the documentary. She then goes on to detail how she began to realize what happened to her was abuse. This is also something very, very common with victims. They don't always see what happened to them as something bad because they blame themselves for it so heavily. So I recommend you read that part as well. The other part I wanted to tell you about is the involvement of Julie Joyner. So she says, a few weeks ago, I was contacted by Julie Joyner, who stated they knew the things Todd and Jessa did to us, and it was wrong. So Julie Joyner said her and Rick knew what Todd and Jessa did to this person, which was facilitate an essay. She assured me that Rick would never allow Todd back on his platform. She acted as if she wanted me to help them with my work as an advocate and all I've learned so far as a social work student who focuses on church demographics. Shortly after, I found out that she was lying to me. Rick Joyner will still continue to endorse ministry couples that work systematically to live chaotic, abusive lives. She did lie to her because Rick Joyner put Todd Bentley on a stage at their vision conference after Julie had a conversation with this person. This person also said, I have and continue to live a great life some 10 years later. It took me 10 years to ever talk about this publicly, and today I told the reporter from the Roy's Report. Leaving these ministries and standing against the abuse they do has caused us great peace. Our family is healthy, and I'm finishing my double master's degree this year. I enjoy raising and homeschooling my 6 children, working to advocate for others who are silenced by mafia ministries. Great. That's another great way to describe these. They are cults. And spending time with my very strong and faithful husband. If it wasn't for him, I do not know if I would be here today. Rick Joyner is aware of the things Todd does, and he does not have an issue with it. Many in their circles believe it's an honor to overlook these things and continue to endorse them. People have worse stories than mine, but I'm hoping more people wake up to just how bad this has truly been for so many. Please don't allow this to continue. Ministry is not just a business, and this is not a bad review. People follow Rick, Todd, and those around them as if they claim to hear from God. That alone changes everything for the people who are innocent and vulnerable. Please boycott them and anything to do with them. Do not even work with people who work with them. I just need to read to you what Todd Bentley said at this conference because these men are sick. Like, this is beyond absurd. So I'm going to give you just a quick overview of what he spoke about and read from the Roy's Report a couple of things that he said. First of all, when Rick Joyner introduced Todd Bentley to the stage, he said, "We love this guy. Haven't seen enough of him lately. He kind of disappeared." What was the reason for that again? Oh, right. A panel of leaders said that he was a horrific, vile human that should never, ever be on a stage again. Todd Bentley said that he was speaking because he had a near-death experience. He said about a month ago, he fell unconscious and was taken to the hospital. And then he said about 10 hours after falling unconscious, he woke up at 3:33 a.m. This again is kind of like loaded language, insider knowledge. 3:33 a.m. has a very spiritual meaning to people in this movement. I was told all the time, if you had a dream and woke up at 3:33 a.m., it was like Jesus and Jesus's presence was there and that dream was prophetic and yada, yada, yada. So that's extremely significant to people in this world. I also think this is a bold-faced lie. It's so specific. But he said when he woke up at 3:33, the Lord told him, "Because of the prayers of the church, God saved you." He said he saw videos of MorningStar Ministries in Moravian Falls, North Carolina, praying for him, and he believes that's what saved his life. Mind you, don't know why he fell unconscious, don't know what was wrong with him. He doesn't say, he didn't tell him. After several days, Bentley said that he began to recall a spiritual experience that he had while he was unconscious. He then goes on to use a lot of loaded language. He says that he needs to carry the mantle of authority. He was at the gates of hell and he had the key. You can read it on the Roy's Report. This stuff makes no sense to normal people, but he did say that he now has authority over death, and that God has asked him to pray for people who are going to die prematurely so that they then wouldn't die prematurely. He said, quote, "The Lord said, you have authority over those with terminal conditions. The devil thinks they're appointed for death, but you have the authority to cancel that, and that's why you're here." So this is another massive tactic of manipulation because he needs a very important reason to come back to a stage to preach in front of people again. And that reason is to save people from literal death. And I need you to understand that people believe in this stuff wholeheartedly. And this is not something that you can prove or disprove. If he tells someone you're going to die prematurely, the devil has you slated for death, he prays for them, and then they don't die anytime soon, which could be anywhere from they don't die tomorrow to they don't die within the next 5 years, then he can say, hey, that was me. I have authority from God and I saved you from death. There is no way to verify that. So now people are going to be more likely to allow him back into a leadership position because they think like, oh my God, this is a literal life or death situation. He also said at that conference that God told him that the last 5 years of hardship have been preparation for him for what's ahead. He said, quote, I went through 5 years of the worst shaking, death, and dying you could imagine, and I'm on the other side. Mind you, Bentley, who's been accused of sexually assaulting 3 girls in Pakistan, said he plans to go back to Pakistan and the Middle East for ministry. So you, the predator, the bad guy, got caught. And that's 5 years of the worst death and dying you can imagine? You who hurt other people. I can't harp on this for too long. This is insanity. This is absolutely insane. You are a bad person. You are a terrible, vile human. Whatever. Rick Joyner's sick. I can't believe someone would ever re-platform a person like this, but he did. So let's move on to today's scandals. Before we go over the next issues of platforming predators, I did want to mention that Rick Joyner also made an ass out of himself when the allegations against Mike Bickle from IHOP KC came forward last year. I covered that pretty extensively on my YouTube channel as well. I think I mentioned that earlier in this video. You can go search through the IHOP KC videos. But when the allegations against Mike Bickle first came to light, Rick Joyner called them a big ol' nothing burger. And he also said that while Mike Bickle may have made mistakes in the past, he was restored, not by Rick Joyner this time, but by whoever else he had claimed restored him, and that we should believe Mike Bickle and not believe the women who were bringing forth allegations. He also accused those women and those supporting them to be in a spirit of witchcraft, his favorite insult. Rick Joyner looked really dumb when those allegations against Mike Bickle proved to be true. Did you know that No Culty Vibes is also a podcast? If you prefer to listen in the car or while you're doing other tasks and you don't want to have your YouTube app open, No Culty Vibes has you covered. You can listen wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you listen on Spotify, you can connect via comments and some other fun things that they do for audience members. Whether you prefer to watch or listen, No Culty Vibes has you covered. Okay, so I'm going to give like a timeline of events of this latest scandal. I am mostly going to be referencing the Roy's report and a couple of news articles that I have linked in the description box or the show notes below. So if you want more details, you can definitely find them in both of those places. I'm going to do my best to like just cover and give a timeline of what I could find. Also, again, trigger warning. These are all stories of some kind of essay, but this has to do with child essay. So just double trigger warning on the next part of this video, I guess. In May of 2023, a former Cornelius, North Carolina police officer and former volunteer at MorningStar Ministries was arrested and charged with 11 counts of child sex crimes. Erickson Lee, who was 25 years old at the time, turned himself in after skipping out on a court hearing and his bail that he had posted just the week before. So he was charged with 4 counts of contributing to the delinquency of a minor, 4 counts of disseminating obscene material to a person under 18 years old, criminal sexual conduct with a minor in the 2nd degree, criminal sexual conduct with a minor in the 3rd degree, and assault and battery. The children that Lee abused were members of MorningStar Fellowship Church in Fort Mill, and they were part of a program that Erickson Lee himself started in 2018 called Young Special Forces. I found in an article, it said, quote, Erickson pitched this program as a leadership school for young men to help them learn skills and develop team building habits. Allegedly, in early 2020, Erickson began taking at least 4 of these juveniles and providing them alcohol, hosting parties, and performing sexual acts on them. The alleged incidents happened at Lee's home in Fort Mill and a couple other locations. When the arrest happened, church officials said that Lee had not been involved in MorningStar for several months. They also said that they immediately reported Lee's behavior to law enforcement once they became aware of it. They also said that they would be cooperating with law enforcement as the investigation continued. So the arrest happened happened in May of 2023, and by September of 2024, Erickson Lee entered an Alford guilty plea on 5 of the 11 charges, which means the defendant does not have to admit guilt, but they do admit that there is enough evidence to show that they are guilty, and he was sentenced in September to 9 years in prison. Just the month before that, on August 7th, 2024, a lawsuit was filed in Rock Hill, South Carolina by a John Doe 1, who is now over the age of 18, but was a minor at the time of the allegations in the civil suit, and James Roe 1 and Jane Roe 1, who are the parents of John Doe 1. The suit was against MorningStar Fellowship Church in Fort Mill, Rick Joyner, David Yarnes, Douglas Lee, Erickson Lee, Chase Portello, and unidentified defendants James Smith 1 through 10. The lawsuit alleged that the defendants failed to put protocols and safety guards in place to protect children from predators. It also alleged that MorningStar Fellowship Church in Fort Mill has had multiple instances of sexual assault and sexual exploitation and abuse of children over the decades. It also said that these prior instances of exploitation were always swept under the rug and never reported to law enforcement. In one of these instances, an unnamed employee assaulted 2 female students of MorningStar University in the early 2000s. The lawsuit also describes a separate incident where a mother was very suspicious of a certain volunteer within the church and had asked repeatedly for her child to be separated from that volunteer. Leaders never did this, and her child ended up being harmed by this volunteer because nothing was done. The lawsuit also alleges that Rick Joyner and MorningStar failed to tell students and staff about Erickson Lee and these horrible things that he was literally convicted of doing. And after allowing Erickson to run this program largely unsupervised for many, many years, they allowed him to step down quietly instead of warning everybody of what happened. Of course, Rick Joyner claims that the allegations in the lawsuit are outrageous and largely untrue. So the CEO and president of MorningStar Ministries at this time was Chris Reed. I mentioned him a little bit earlier in the video. And a little bit later in the month of August, after the lawsuit was filed, Chris Reed stepped down as CEO and president and said that he was standing on the side of the victims and claimed that he did not want to be leading an organization that was going through such difficult lawsuits and allegations. But come to find out, Chris Reed was dealing with his own allegations of sexual misconduct from 2021. So if you're counting at home, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 predators that Rick Joyner has defended and platformed that we know of publicly. And according to the lawsuits, there are several more that we don't really have details on publicly. Chris Reed admitted to pursuing a woman sexually, sending her terrible texts and kissing her. This occurred in 2021 while he was married, the father of 6 children, and the pastor at MorningStar Fellowship Church in Fort Mill, and was slated to become the new CEO and president of MorningStar. Roy's report was able to talk to the woman who made the allegations. Her name was Catherine. She just gave her first name for the purposes of being interviewed. She's 7 years younger than Chris Reed, but she was a student at MSU at the time. I really like that the Roy's report commented that this is considered clergy sexual abuse because of the power differential between Chris Reed as the pastor and leader of this ministry and Catherine being a student. Chris Reed did tell the Roy's report, quote, "I sorely regret it. I take full responsibility for it. It wasn't her fault at all. I'm fully to blame." And this is another part where these charismatic, prophetic, new apostolic churches can get very, very culty. Catherine said that Chris Reed started this relationship because of a prophecy. Reed first messaged her on Facebook and told her that he saw that she had recently come through a very difficult season successfully, but she was about to start really gaining traction to fulfill her destiny. He also told her that he had gotten to know a few students, but there was something really special on Catherine. A couple days later, he saw her again and messaged her and said that he sensed she was struggling. And then he gave her his personal phone number to save in her phone told her to save it under a different name, and told her to reach out to him anytime she wanted. He also told her that while he can't personally extend his time for everyone and all the students, he really felt like he was supposed to for her. This would definitely be considered like a version of love bombing. This is a very common manipulation tactic of narcissists where they really make you feel special and they make you feel different and better than other people and like you're really important to them. And that's a very powerful psychological tool. So then it's quoted in the Roy's report. The two of them then met frequently alone in Reed's van during November and December of 2021. Reed would often kiss her, Catherine said, and one encounter included Reed touching her genitals. Reed also sent her vulgar texts. Catherine talked about how she felt very special and very chosen with the extra attention from Chris Reed, and he began using the Bible to justify their relationship, and he often referred to himself as a David, which is spiritual manipulation. And actually a lot of like clergy predators use this line and refer to themselves as a David as like an excuse for their behavior or justification for their behavior. After the sexual touching in Reed's car, Catherine and Chris Reed decided to mutually end their relationship. Catherine did go to leadership and disclose this after some time, and her mom was sometimes part of these meetings. Catherine did say that Rick Joyner was very nice to her and he offered to pay for any counseling for her if she needed it. But her mother said that Rick Joyner also said during their meetings, look, you either trust us or you don't. So take that how you will. When Rick Joyner first commented on this situation as it became public, he said he didn't feel their relationship crossed any kind of line. So I guess sexting with a student when you're a pastor and slated to take leadership of an entire ministry isn't crossing any kind of line, even though he did way worse things than that. Joyner also said that he met with Catherine at the time to make sure that she was okay. So he knew about it before he allowed Chris Reed to take over his church and ministry. Also, what is Catherine supposed to say in that situation when all of these men in power above her are like, so you good? What is she supposed to say to that when confronted privately? I don't know. Rick also said, according to the Roy's report, quote, we thought it had gone far enough that it needed discipline and restoration and boundaries set with female students. Chris was all for it. I think Chris handled it in the best way it could have been done. The way to handle that is to take someone out of a leadership position. That's the way to handle that. I don't know why that's such a foreign concept. When confronted by the Roy's report about Catherine's allegations, Chris Reed initially only admitted to the sexting and some hugging. When the Roy's report was like, well, what about the kissing? Because she said you kissed her as well. And he was like, oh, yeah, well, I guess I did that too. And then when they asked about touching, like sexual touching, he denied that entirely. I don't know how he expects anyone to believe him though when he lies and then admits like a little bit more and a little bit more when confronted. He said, quote, there was no sexual encounter. She's never seen me unclothed or touched me unclothed. I've never seen her unclothed or touched her unclothed. That was a very specific way of avoiding saying, no, I did not touch her genitals, but whatever. And I need to stress to you guys that Catherine told MorningStar leaders about this in 2022, not Chris Reed. If someone was truly like so sorry and agreed he needed boundaries and needed this and needed that, why didn't he report himself to leadership after their relationship ended and ask for help in this area? If he's such a good person and handled it the best way that could have been done, why didn't he admit what he had done? Why did Catherine go to leadership and admit it? And only after confronted did Chris Reed admit to some of it and not all of it. Chris Reed did also tell the church about it. He, one morning when he was pastoring, said, quote, here's what I told the church. I take full responsibility for it. There was a situation in my life where I needed the grace of God. Very vague. It did not involve sex or money or notoriety, but it was still wrong, and I had to talk to my elders in my life and be accountable about that, which isn't exactly the truth and could mean literally anything, and it was sexual. Sexting is sexual. I don't understand the distinction. So all of this came to light mostly in the Roy's report. And not even 2 weeks after resigning from Morningstar, Chris Reed went on a Facebook Live with his wife claiming that his sexual misconduct in 2021 was due to being under spiritual attack. So this again is loaded language and might not mean anything to you if you're not familiar with these circles, but he's basically saying that the devil was attacking him spiritually and he didn't recognize that that's what was happening. It is a way to completely remove any accountability for yourself and say it was actually the devil or demons that did all of this, not me. After all of this came out, I think Rick Joyner felt like Chris Reed was saying this was Rick Joyner's fault by saying he was under spiritual attack, because Rick Joyner should have recognized that as the prophetic man of God that he is, or Chris Reed should have recognized that considering he was the one taking over from Morningstar. And I think Rick Joyner was probably really embarrassed that this scandal came out like right after Chris Reed took over. And he kind of started backtracking and started saying that now Catherine and Chris Reed were telling two different stories and one of them was lying. At first, he was saying that he's more inclined to believe Chris Reed. He also said that he would ask Reed and Catherine to both take a polygraph test, and that by suggesting a polygraph test, that should really tell him who's telling the truth by who's willing to take it and who's not. Honestly, this started turning into a complete cluster of a situation. We don't have time in this video to go over every single way that Rick Joyner handled this poorly, but the Roy's report does give some more detail to his mishandling. We did find out a little bit more about the structure of MorningStar Ministries through this debacle, though, because the Roy's report asked Rick Joyner who was on the board of MorningStar, because obviously the board would have agreed to put Chris Reed in leadership even after this scandal, and the board is not posted publicly anywhere. And Rick Joyner did send the Roy's report a partial list of board members and said that he would send the rest later, but I don't think he ever did. The board members mentioned are Hardiman, former U.S. Undersecretary of Defense, General Jerry Boykin, Mark Nuttall, who worked in the Reagan administration, singer Ricky Skaggs, Wellington Boone, a pastor and board member for IHOP KC, and Lance Wallenow, who is a prophet who popularized the Seven Mountain Mandate and someone who is constantly named in Christian nationalist circles today. By September 3rd, Rick Joyner began to admit that evidence against Chris Reed was mounting and claimed that he wasn't going to hide any of that evidence from the public. Rick Joyner also finally admitted that he allowed Chris Reed to become president and CEO of MorningStar Ministries during his restoration process, not after. Then a different Morningstar pastor and leader, former pastor and leader, because he left over the situation, made a statement about Chris Reed saying that Chris Reed became president and CEO just a couple months after they learned of the scandal. Not during his restoration process, not after he had been restored. They allowed him to be promoted to leading the entire ministry just a couple months after they even learned of the misconduct. This former leader also added that the board decided not to inform the public of this misconduct. And we slowly see Rick Joyner changing his tune about this, because he's now saying that he was lied to and blindsided by Chris Reed. And I'm so sorry, but as a prophet and a man of God, this next part made me cackle. He said, "I didn't discern these things. I did ask the Lord to make manifest the truth in this or any deception of whatever, and I trusted the Lord to do it. Then I forgot to say, do it now. So the Lord happened to wait until just now to reveal the truth to me." Not back when I asked for it, just now. So now Rick Joyner's blaming God for not telling him the truth of the situation. I personally think this is all a lie. I personally think Rick Joyner heard all of this, because what Catherine says she told Rick Joyner and the board is not what Rick Joyner said he was told. And what Chris Reed told them, which is different from what Catherine told them, is also different from what Rick Joyner said he was told. So I think Rick Joyner's lying in this situation. And again, like the rest of these men, was caught. I want my husband to explain to you guys what Rick Joyner meant when he said, I asked the Lord to give me the truth about the situation, and I just forgot to say, give it to me now, because that sounds extremely absurd to the rest of us and to me. But my husband has been in this culture for longer than I have, and he was talking to me about it, and he was like, no, that would have made perfect sense to me while I was in it.
Like, really, it has to do with his anointing and his mandate that he says that he got from God would make it preconditions you, because he's in a leadership position. You always think that those people know more than you, that they they've gone through all of the teachings and they've spent their entire life diving into this. And then, again, growing up in that kind of environment, you learn to understand that the highest level, the highest calling on somebody's life is to be anointed, is to be at that level. So when somebody has people around him saying, this guy's anointed, you're just like in awe. You're like, oh, okay, cool. So when he says, I forgot to ask for it now, you're like, oh, he's just like me, but better. Because not only could he call on God to give him the answer now, not only can he do that, but he's also fallible enough to forget to ask for now, right? Yeah, or just God being, or God just being like, I know that there are some things that are going to happen over the next period of time that I'm not going to remind you to say now. I'm not going to give it to you early. I am going to give it to you at the time that I deem, because as somebody who's in the congregation all the time, who's a part of this, who's lived this, that is a very stock standard answer and a fallback anytime you run into any issues. Well, it's God's timing. It's God's timing. And so it's a normal thing to hear as an excuse to something going on. I think it can even be really hard to explain to somebody who hasn't had that ingrained in them. Yeah. Like, it's so, I say it and I feel like I'm explaining it to you. Well, I'm explaining it to you, and I feel like you're still not completely understanding the depth and breadth of having that just as like an emotion. And like, it's almost calming to me to be like, oh, it's on God's time, not your time, right? Yeah. And that it makes you feel like you need to do more soul searching. I know we're kind of going on a tangent here, but like, that's kind of what I mean by like, even just being like, oh, it's on God's timing, not your timing, has massive implications when you think about it. So it's such a standard, such deeply ingrained in this culture, that him saying those things, it has a ton of unspoken words to it. Yeah. Even just explaining it that way. But on the other side of it, I realize how ridiculous it is. Yeah. Took us so long to like even think that, oh, that's an excuse. Yeah. Oh, because they're lying. Right. Yeah. Absolutely. It's a constant fallback that they can always pull out. Right. Because they're lying. Yeah. I mean, it's a failsafe because you can't question it. Yeah. You can't question God's. You can't question somebody who's anointed. Thus the manipulation. Yep.
Rick Joyner also said, quote, I would have never turned this ministry over to them if I'd known what I know right now. I feel like things were done that should have disqualified Chris from being made leader of this ministry. By September 7th, 2024, 2 more lawsuits were filed by 2 more John Does against Rick Joyner, MorningStar, Erickson Lee, Doug Lee, the same people that I named earlier in the video. And they are being represented by the same team that is representing John Doe 1. All of the lawsuits claim that leaders failed to report child SA to law enforcement, even though clergy are mandated reporters in South Carolina. The suit also alleges that in multiple instances, the victims were also encouraged not to go to law enforcement about their abuse. John Doe's suit states, quote, defendant's conduct was extreme and outrageous as to exceed all possible bounds of decency and is intolerable in a civilized community. Then, just 5 weeks after Chris Reed resigned from MorningStar Ministries and amidst his back and forth with Rick Joyner, he announced that he is starting his own church under Chris Reed Ministries called Jesus Revolution. I'm guessing he's doing this because he needs an income and doesn't know how to do anything else. Rick Joyner, shockingly, for once, told the Roy's Report that he does not see any repentance in Chris Reed, and he thinks he is being reckless and dangerous and shouldn't be in any leadership position, which is the first time Rick Joyner has ever said this about a predator. But don't worry, he did add that he thinks anyone can be restored given time and repentance. Obviously, finally, there are several congregants of MorningStar that have been very bothered by these recent scandals, especially the child SA. And Rick Joyner, in a statement to his church, said that he was good with anyone who wanted to leave amidst the recent scandals because we need their seats. And he expects major growth in the months and years to come, which honestly sounds extremely immature and sounds like a toddler throwing a fit, in my opinion. However, in the wake of recent scandals, a former MSU student, Emily Elston, has created a petition condemning MorningStar for its alleged lack of accountability and calling for Rick Joyner's resignation. The petition also wants an independent investigation done on MorningStar Ministries and how abuse has been handled by the church throughout the years and how this recent situation was handled as well. Elston told the Roy's Report that this petition is a grassroots effort, and the signers include ministry associates from every year of MorningStar Ministries back to 1993. It also includes MorningStar conference speakers, interns, church volunteers, former students, etc. Also, former students and teachers and a coach, Comenius School for Creative Leadership, also signed this petition. Rick Joyner, hopefully to no one's surprise by this point in the video, called every single person who signed this petition wolves in sheep's clothing and disgruntled former associates. He did leave out the word witchcraft, which I was personally shocked by. He did attribute this to, though, you guessed it, a spiritual attack. For decades, leaders at MorningStar, including Chris Reed, has used prophecy to abuse people and have completely operated without any accountability. And Elston says that she believes Chris Reed will continue this pattern of abuse at his new church, and I very much agree with her. I've personally seen people use prophecy to manipulate other people in much smaller ways when I was part of MorningStar Fellowship Church in Wilmington. What I saw was more like when people felt really strongly about something, they would really claim like, I'm hearing from the Lord about this, and it would give more weight to their opinions, especially as leaders, than it would give weight to the opinions of students or congregants, which can be really harmful. I have also seen prophecy used with good intentions. I've seen it be really comforting to people, and I've seen people really truly believe in it and believe that they are helping. But ultimately, I think when you prophesy from a divine being, you're removing a level of accountability, and you're removing a level of like personal decision and personal feelings and authority, which are always valid. And that can ultimately be extremely harmful. I also know someone who signed this petition and has received pretty strong backlash for doing so. This is often what cults do when members leave or criticize leadership. They ostracize them, they label them as disgruntled or wolves in sheep's clothing, etc. Or sometimes they even say they were never true believers or never truly part of the in crowd to begin with. We've seen many characteristics of a cult in these stories that I've shared with you today, whether you're referring to Stephen Hassan's bite model and forms of behavior control and thought control and emotional control and information control, or whether we're referring to someone like cult expert Dr. Yanya Lalich and her explanation of a cult. I'm going to read some excerpts of her definition and explanation of a cult to you right now, so you can kind of just have it in your mind and compare it to what you've learned today. So Dr. Yanya Lalich says, a cult can be either a sharply bounded social group or a diffusely bounded social movement held together through shared commitment to a charismatic leader. It upholds a transcendent belief system, often but not always religious in nature, that includes a call for personal transformation. It also requires a high level of personal commitment from its members in words and deeds. This definition is not meant to be evaluative evaluative in the sense of implying that a group is good, bad, benign, or harmful. Rather, it's meant to convey a systemic view of such a group, which is comprised of a charismatic relationship, a promise of fulfillment, and a methodology by which to achieve it. These groups exist on a continuum of influence regarding a particular group's effect on its members and on society and vice versa, and a continuum of control from less invasive to all encompassing. Cults can be distinguished from other non mainstream groups, for example, religious or political sects, fringe or alternative groups or movements, communes, and intentional communities, because of their intense ideologies and their demand for a total commitment from at least some of their members. Each group must be observed and judged on its own merits and its own practices and behaviors as to whether it falls within this category type, which is not meant to be dismissive or one sided. Cults are frequently totalistic and separatist. Some cults are totalistic when they are exclusive in their ideology, seen as sacred or the only way, and impose upon their members systems of social control that are confining and all inclusive, which is encompassing all aspects of life. People in such cults tend to espouse an all encompassing belief system, exhibit excessive devotion to and dependency on their perfect leader, avoid criticism of the group, its leaders, and its practices, and have an attitude of disdain for non members. Frequently, the totalistic and separatist features of some cults makes them appear alien and threatening, and those features have attracted great attention in mass media. So cults can have different levels of influence, different levels of harm. Oftentimes, the closer you are to leadership in the cult, the more scary and harmful the cult gets. But I think we can apply the systemic view of a cult to something like MorningStar Ministries and Rick Joyner. And we can think about these transcendent and totalistic ideologies as a reason for an organization that allows predators to continue preying on people and allows these harms to go unpunished and untalked about for so long. I personally had no idea any of this was going on when I was part of Morningstar. I left for other harms in my own deconstruction process. Knowing about it now honestly makes me sick, but I am so glad that these things are coming to light. And I hope that the more that we can talk about it, the more that gets exposed, the more that these victims will see justice, and the less people will be pulled into Morningstar Ministries and enthralled by Rick Joyner. And less people will feel like these people can do no wrong, but will see these organizations for what they are, which is controlling and harmful. I want to know what you guys think about this cult, what you guys think about this video. Please leave me a comment below. If you're listening to the podcast, leave a comment on Spotify or find me on Instagram and let me know what you think there. Let me know if you've ever been part of Morningstar Ministries or if you've heard of it. I really, really want to hear from you to continue this conversation. The last thing I think I want to say about this is that it's really easy to hear all of these stories of harm and bad things that are going on inside these churches, this apostolic prophetic movement or new apostolic reformation, and think that people who join it are crazy or think that nothing good ever happens in these movements. And I think that it's important to talk about the bad things, right? These leaders and the movements talk enough about the good things. I don't think we have to share the good things along with the bad things. I don't think the good things negate the bad things. I do think, though, that there are a lot of people in these movements with a lot of integrity and a lot of faith that are being harmed. Even people who aren't being essayed or directly manipulated are being manipulated and misled by these leaders. There are several leaders in this movement that are being exposed right now for faking these prophetic words. And again, if you're not familiar with cults and you're not familiar with this belief system, you might think, and I often still have these thoughts, like, of course they're faking it. Duh. No one's psychic, no one's prophetic. But there are people who earnestly and faithfully believe this and have a lot of integrity in the way that they prophesy and the way that they talk about these things. And they're being harmed and they're being misled and they're being lied to and manipulated. And I think that's also sad and that's also terrible. And I think that we have a responsibility to spread the word and share these horrible things that these lying, manipulative leaders are doing to take people's money. I really think that's the basis of it, is they want money and they want notoriety and they will do anything to get it. So that's why I think it's important to share. That's why I get so worked up. And I hope this video was informative for you. I hope that if you have been harmed by these movements, this video helps you feel seen. And I hope that if you knew nothing about these movements, that you learned something about it. And if you or others get exposed to something like this, you'll see the red flags for what they are before you even get the chance to be pulled in. Thank you for watching or listening to this episode of No Culty Vibes. Be sure to check the description box or the show notes for all the ways that you can support this channel and where you can find me on all social media. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye.